Hey, boys and girls, we're back, and we're going to be reading about Paul Bunyan today. Now, before we get started, Mr. Gilbert has had the great pleasure of visiting Paul Bunyan not once but twice in his life, so we're going to start with a fun photo. This was about 4 years ago now. Mr. Gilbert, Mr. Scott, and Mr. Donahue take a trip each summer or February break and go different places around the country together. As teachers, we love to learn together. We love to explore. And this was a photo that we took of Paul Bunyan and his blue ox babe. Here's Mr. Gilbert and Mr. Donahue exploring this roadside stop. All right, let's go ahead and let's get right into things now. So let's read Paul Bunyan. And as we read Paul Bunyan today, we're going to be answering this question. Let's make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. Describe the life of Paul Bunyan. The topic sentence. Of course, we're going to kind of try to come up with three different uh, ways to describe the life of Paul Bunyan. So let's go ahead and let's get started. As we're reading, of course, there we are. As we're reading, please make sure that you have a pen or highlighter, a pencil, paper, whatever you need to mark up this text. Let's go ahead and let's get started with this text. I'm actually going to start by just in the margins here. I'm going to label the paragraphs 1, 2, 3, and 4, just so when we are talking, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So we're going to describe the life of Paul Bunyan today as we read. Let's go ahead, let's get started. Again, mark up this text. We're going to come back together and come up with 3 ways to describe his life. So let's go ahead and get started. Paul Bunyan was a big, tall, strong lumberjack. The story of his life is a folk tale. It has been shared with each new generation. The story has been exaggerated. It is a folktale that means people still know. Most tales of Paul Bunyan include a sidekick. A sidekick is a friend who always is by your side. Paul's sidekick was a blue ox called Babe. The stories of Paul and Babe all describe how strong Paul Bunyan was. In fact, when he was born, it took 5 storks to carry the infant. He was quite large. When he was just a week old, Paul had to wear his father's clothes. As he grew older, Paul was always out with Babe and helping with different projects. Paul and Babe often used their strength to help people in need. One day, a group of loggers discovered a huge log jam. It was in the Wisconsin River. The logs were almost 200 feet high. Woo! The jam continued for a mile or more. Paul and Babe came to help. Babe got in the water and moved his tail back and forth. The water became sorry, the water became quite rough, causing the jam to move upstream. While moving the logs with each movement of his tail, more logs began to break. Apart from the jam, finally the logs began to move more and float downstream. The story of Paul Bunyan still lives on today. People enjoy hearing about the big, strong man and his big, strong ox. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple minutes right now. I want you to go back, reread the text. And as you're rereading it, here's the question once again that you're trying to answer. Describe the life of Paul Bunyan. So right now, go see if you can find 3 ways that you can describe Paul Bunyan's life. Go ahead and do that. Okay, hopefully at this point you found 3 ways to describe Paul Bunyan's life. If not, pause it, and when you're done, you can unpause it. All right, let's go ahead and let's take a look. So let's start right here in paragraph 2. Paragraph 2 is where we start learning about Paul Bunyan. And let me take a look at it. It says most tales of Paul Bunyan include his sidekick. A sidekick is a friend who always is by your side. Paul's sidekick was a blue ox called Babe. So I think this is a really important piece of information. Um, and I want to go ahead and I want to highlight this because whenever you learn about Paul Bunyan, you are going to learn about Paul Bunyan's sidekick. So I'm going to underline this sentence right here. Paul's sidekick was a blue ox called Babe. I think this is a really important piece of information which we can include in our writing assignment. Um, let's go ahead and take a look at the rest of this paragraph though, because I think there's also other parts of this paragraph. And now the cat's in the background. Everyone say hi, Archie. Um, there's another important part of this paragraph. Can you get down, please? That we can take a look at. So if we hop down, excuse me, if we hop down to the next sentence, it says Paul and Babe all describe how strong Paul Bunyan was. In fact, when he was born, it took 5 storks to carry him. So if you don't know what a stork is, it's a large bird that a lot of times you see them portrayed in like folk tales or cartoons. They're carrying babies to people. So instead of just 1 stork, it took 5 storks. But I think there's an even better piece of information I really like, and it's this sentence right here. When he was just a week old, Paul had to wear his father's clothes. So I think this sentence kind of helps us describe Paul Bunyan's life. He was super big, and right here, when he's 1 week old, we know how big he was because he's wearing his dad's clothes. I mean, that's just like insane. Um, how large Paul Bunyan was. So right now we have 2 pieces of information. We have Paul's sidekick was a blue ox, and when he, excuse me, when he was just a week old, Paul had to wear his father's clothes. So again, we're describing the life of Paul Bunyan. Let's hop down here to our box and bullet plan. Describe the life of Paul Bunyan. There we go. And let's take a look at paragraph number 3. So I think Paul and Babe have some interesting things in here. Like I said, you're always going to find Paul Bunyan and Babe together. So I think it's important that we include them in our box and bullet plan, in our writing, when we're describing the life of Paul Bunyan. Now Jovi's at the door. So let's go down here. Can you find a piece of information about Paul and Babe in paragraph 3 that describes Paul's life? So I think this line right here in the second sentence, Paul and Babe often use their strength to help people in need, because everything we read, um, everything we read in this paragraph is going to be about Paul and Babe and they're helping people. So now we have 3 pieces of evidence, right? 3 details that help us describe Paul Bunyan's life. Paul had a sidekick. Um, his name was Babe. He was a blue ox. We have how big he was, and a fact to describe that was he was a week old. Paul had to wear his dad's clothes. And then if we hop down to paragraph 3, we have that third detail. Paul and Babe often use their strength to help people in need. And then it goes on to explain the story. So what I want to do now is I want to add a little bit more information, but let's go ahead and let's add your things to your box and bullet plan. So maybe you have some different details than me. That's okay. There are other details as well that would work. Let's go over to our box and bullet plan right now. And go ahead and write your topic sentence and add your 3 details. So I'm going to write my topic sentence right now. Um, for this one, describe the life of Paul Bunyan. You can write just about anything. I want to, again, kind of get away and break away from that, just flipping the question around. I'm going to say something like this, keeping it right from the text. But Paul Bunyan's whoops, life is a folktale. So I can describe his life, but I am going to describe it as a folktale because that is indeed what it is. Okay, so you have your 3 pieces of evidence highlighted at this point. Should putting them in your box and bullet plan. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull my first detail. Now I'm going to pull up my my story here. And although we had these 3 details, we had 1, 2, and 3. I actually don't want to start with this. Paul's sidekick was a blue ox named Babe. I think we should start with the beginning of his life, how big he is. So I'm actually going to hop down, and I'm going to start with this detail right here when he was just a week old. And I'm going to add that as my first point in my plan. So I'm going to say he was born big and strong. Then I'm going to hop down to my second one. I'm going to go back to my text because I want to keep it all text-based. And now I'm going to use this piece right here because, again, we talked about how Paul Bunyan was always with his blue ox named Babe. I'm going to add that in right here. Let's say Paul had a sidekick. And then let's hop down to our third detail. You, at this point, I would assume, added your third detail. I'm going to go add mine right now. I'm hopping down to my third piece of evidence. It says Paul and Babe often use their strength to help people. So let's write something about helping people in our box and plan. Write Paul and Babe, proper noun, make sure it's capitalized, helped. Okay, so we have our box and bullet plan right now, and we know what we're going to write about tomorrow, right? We have our topic sentence. We have our 3 points. We have born big and strong, Paul had a sidekick, and Paul and Babe helped people. Pretty good, right? All right. So what we've been doing is we've added details or evidence after each one of these points. So yesterday we wrote about the invention of gum, and let's say we had our third point yesterday was Thomas Adams, and we talked about how Thomas Adams was really one of the key people who added flavor and made gum what we know as gum. And we just had 1 point here in our box and bullet plan, and then we just kind of went back and forth from the piece to add our evidence. Today, let's do something a little bit different. Let's add on to that plan. So I want to go ahead and under this first bullet point right here, which says born big and strong, I want to add a little bit extra so that when I'm stretching out that detail, I know exactly what I'm going to say tomorrow. So I'm going to say something like, let's actually go back to the text so I can show you. We started with when he was just a week old, Paul had to wear his father's clothes. So we're talking about how he was born big and strong, and we know how big he was based on the sentence. So I'm going to go and add in 1 week old wore father's clothing. Okay, got not a complete sentence here, but just enough that I know what I'm going to write about tomorrow. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time right now. Let's see, it's how about why don't you take the next like 3-4 minutes, and I want you to go ahead and add a detail in after each one of your details. So look how I have my box and bullet plan set up. I have 1, and then I have A. It's just because the computer did like that. But under each detail, I want you to have an additional detail explaining that previous detail so that when we're writing tomorrow, you can go ahead and tie that back. Okay, so come up with a second piece of evidence for 2 and 3 to tie it back to your actual details. What are you going to write about? Give you another minute or two. Excuse me. Okay, so at this point, hopefully you've added some more evidence to your plan. I'm going to go and show you my box and bullet plan. I did it while you were writing yours. So let's hop down to number 2 here. We said Paul had a sidekick. We already wrote that. We already talked about that together. Then I went back and looked in my writing. Let me my nifty tool here. And I talk about Paul's sidekick. So Paul had a sidekick, and it was a blue ox called Babe. So I added this in to my piece of writing here. A Babe, a giant blue ox. So tomorrow I can go back when I'm actually writing about this, and I can talk about how, as they grew old together, they were both strong. They both did things together, right? So let's also go back. Whoops, lots of screens here. And let's take a look at number 3. Our third point that we're making is Paul and Babe help people. So we're describing the life of Paul Bunyan. We're talking about how he was a very helpful person, and he helped with his blue ox, Babe. I added Jam and River because it gives the example in our story here. Paul and Babe often use their strength to help people in need. One day, a group of loggers discovered a huge log jam. It was in the Wisconsin River. The logs were almost 200 feet high. Woohoo! The jam continued for a mile or more, and we then learned that Paul and Babe helped break apart the jam, and the logs began to move and flood the stream. So tomorrow, when I'm writing about Paul and Babe helping people, I can talk about the jam in the river. Whoops. Oops. I can talk about the jam in the river so that I have a really solid plan going into my writing tomorrow. So this is something a little bit different. Some of you have planned like this in the past. This is a great example of how you can plan and really stretch out that evidence and those details. If you were at all confused with this because we did extra planning today, please shoot me an email, get in contact with me, G-chat me, whatever. And we'll go from there. Shout out to Jameer. Jameer, I just got your text and I'm about to take a look at it. You're writing about the invention of gumballs, and I'm very excited. Shout out again to Steven. He's been super on top of things, reaching out. Brian, I saw you are burning it up right now in Freckle. Awesome job. Also, I saw a lot of my class in Freckle. Keep on working, guys, and I'll talk to you very soon. Bye, everyone. And I'll leave you with Mr. Gilbert visiting another Paul Bunyan out west. I can't remember what state this was. I want to say Oregon as a child. And on that note, adios, everyone.